All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for the New Recruiter Bootcamp, for being here this afternoon or this morning, wherever you may be. This session today is called Asking the Right Questions, Practical Interview Techniques for ID&R. Recruiters interview a wide variety of people every day on the job in order to obtain information for student eligibility, leads to potential new students, or to get information about agribusinesses and farms. To maximize their success, recruiters must become masters of the interview. This presentation looks at practical techniques all recruiters can learn to improve their skills by ensuring they're catering their questions to their audience, making their interviewee feel more comfortable, and more. I've also noticed that some questions were asked on the Whova app for this session in particular, and so I'll try to answer them as best as I can as we go along. So to begin with, let's talk a little bit about why interviews are important. The object of identification and recruitment is to obtain information. A lot of times, we as recruiters, we focus solely on the number of students we enroll or COEs, but the reality is what we are really trying to do is to obtain information, because it's the information that we obtain that allows us to go and define new students. And so when we measure success of our identification and recruitment efforts, we're measuring our success according to the amount of information that we are able to obtain. And so we obtain information through interviews. Every conversation that we have, whether that be inter-community, is an interview designed to obtain information in some way, shape, or form that can either potentially lead to new eligible students or to farms or businesses where migrant workers may be found. So recruiters have to have good interview skills, strong interview skills, so that they can obtain as much information as possible. The success of any recruiter is directly linked to the amount of information they are able to obtain while out in the field. So to begin with, let's talk about who we interview when we're out there. When we're out in our communities, we're interviewing students that could potentially qualify for the migrant education program. We're interviewing family members of students. We're interviewing potential migrant workers, crew leaders on farms, farms and business owners, community members, so people that are working in stores or laundromats that we might go to visit where migrant workers might be, as well as people that are working for organization partners. So if there are any particular organizations in your community that you actively work with to try to find students, when we talk to them, we are still conducting a type of interview. We interview teachers that work in the local school districts, the Title I directors that oversee the migrant education program and other Title I efforts in our school districts, principals, superintendents, and many more. So as you can see, we as recruiters, we talk to a wide variety of people, and it's really important for us to be able to have those skills and to know exactly how to interact with each different person that we meet and how to properly conduct an interview with them to obtain the information that we need in order to be successful. So why do interviews go wrong when we're out in the field? A study that was conducted found that the greatest reason that interviews go wrong is because the interviewer goes into the interview without sufficient planning. Interviews often go wrong when we do not know how to respond to a response or situation that we encounter. When we do not know how to respond to a situation, our interviewee, the person that we are talking to, can often notice that we don't have a correct answer, and it can create anxiety and give anxiety to them as well. From personal experience, from me working all over the country and working with recruiters, even experienced recruiters can be nervous at times to speak or conduct interviews with new people they meet. I found that recruiters are especially nervous about speaking to farms and agribusiness owners. One of the things that we at IDRC are trying to highlight is how we as recruiters can continue to work better with farmers, because it's something that we've noticed all over the country, that many recruiters are struggling to have those skills to be able to talk to the farm business owners. A lot of anxiety recruiters feel when out in the field comes from not knowing how people are going to respond to them. Talking to recruiters who are nervous about speaking to people, many of them say that they are nervous primarily because they don't know if people are going to respond negatively or not. Another reason that interviews go wrong is because our interview subjects often do not understand the importance of the information that they are being asked. And so if the interview subject, the person that we're speaking to, doesn't know why we are talking to them or why we're conducting the interview, it can have a negative effect on the discussion. As a recruiter, you should always let the interview subject, so you should always let the person that you're speaking to know that the information that they are providing can help lead to other families and students being helped. And so no matter who you are talking to, always let them know that they are important and the information they are giving you is important. A little planning ahead of the interview can alleviate a lot of the nerves you may feel and can help you to avoid any unfortunate circumstances that might come up, as well as increase the likelihood of obtaining useful information. Before you go out and enter the field, you should always think about your audience, think about who you're going to be interacting with, and think about what would be the best way to approach them. Start brainstorming for what type of questions you should be asking. Start thinking about what it is, the information that you want to obtain, and start thinking about how people may respond. Because if you can plan ahead of time and know how you're going to respond to their response, the interview is going to go a lot smoother. As I mentioned, you want to make sure that you know ahead of time all the information that you want to obtain. Think about what your goals for the interview are. What do you need answered? As well as think about what information do you want answered that isn't 100% necessary. One of the key skills that as recruiters we need to learn sometimes is to recognize when things might not be going our way and when we need to kind of back off and maybe return at a later date or change the subject. And so sometimes that involves knowing that there's information that we may want, but we may just not be able to get in the moment. And so think ahead of time about what kind of information that might be. What are the things that are crucial and absolutely necessary for what you're wanting to accomplish? And what are the things that can wait for a little bit? So as recruiters then, what should be the things that we should always be looking for? In every conversation and interview that we conduct, our goal as a recruiter should always be to look for the following information. Number one, we should always be looking for leads and referrals. If you attended the introductory session, you saw us talk about the IDRC electronic survey tool. It's a great tool that you can advertise out in the communities in order to try to get referrals from anyone that you encounter. Anybody can submit a referral to you as long as they have that link to the IDRC referral tool. And so we should always be trying to get that information in leads that could point us in the direction of potential new students. We should also always be looking for and checking of eligibility for families and youth that we encounter. Thinking about, what might make people eligible, thinking about, what kind of questions we can ask in order to see if people do in fact qualify. We should always be looking as well for what kind of resources are available in the communities that we go to. So thinking about and trying to check to see, is there anything that you know about that's out there that you can share? Is there anything that you might not know about? And asking questions, asking questions where people go to. So, when you're talking to a worker, you can ask them, where do you go to cash your checks? So that okay, this is the place where many people go to cash their checks. So that could be a good place to potentially go and meet new workers. Where do you wash your clothes? Do you go to church? There might be churches in your community that have a high population of migrant families that are going to visit them. Thinking about where food banks are in your area, adult language learning resources as well. What kind of resources are offered, by the library? And so always be looking for new resources that you can hand out. Health resources are great to be able to share with families as well, so that you can see them and then share with more people that you encounter. You should always be looking for information related to farms and agribusinesses in your area. One of the great ways to recruit new students is to go and find the workers themselves on the farms. And so, whenever you do encounter somebody that might qualify, ask them, where they work. One of the questions that we had before the session was somebody asked, Is it okay to ask for somebody's employer? And it's always okay to ask for somebody's employer. It's a great idea so that you can know more about where exactly people are working. One thing though that we as recruiters probably shouldn't be looking out for, and we had a question about this, is whether we should ask about people's documentation status. And as educators, we are required by law, not to ask about somebody's documentation status, so whether they have visas or not. So that's kind of information that we should avoid, because that information doesn't matter for the purpose of eligibility. So an important tip to keep in mind: you should always keep your audience in mind when planning what questions you need to ask. Make sure that you are using language that is appropriate for your audience, language that they are going to understand. Especially true when we're talking and describing the migrant education program. Not everybody is going to be aware and know what the migrant education program is or what Title I is. So we want to make sure that we are using language that is appropriate for who we are speaking to, that is easy to understand and for them to process. We should make sure that we're trying to keep our questions as straightforward as possible. We aren't looking to confuse anybody. We aren't looking to try to trip people up. We want to keep everything simple and easy. So just as an example, think about, would you phrase the same question that you would ask to a farmer as you would to an out-of-school youth that you encounter that might qualify? Would you frame the same question? Would you phrase the question the same to a student's parents or to a community partner? Things are going to change a lot of times depending on who we talk to. And so think ahead of time about who you're going to be talking to, who you're going to be interacting with in the community, and change your questions accordingly. So now let's start talking about the different audiences that we encounter. So when we're speaking to farmers or to business owners, our goal of the interviews should always be to, number one, check to see if they have any employees that might qualify. We want to know when we're speaking to a farm owner or even to a contractor out in the field, if they have employees working for them that have recently arrived and might be eligible for the program. We should always be trying to get out as much information as possible about the farm and the business so that we can better understand the agricultural process. And so ask, what is your business and when are you the busiest during the year? It's important to know when they are the busiest so that we can make sure to respect their time, to respect the work that's being done. And as well, us as recruiters, oftentimes when we're out in the field, during our busy season, it's when farmers are the busiest as well. So it's when they have the most work. And so one of the things I always encourage recruiters to do is to make sure you use those slower times throughout the year in order to continue to build up relationships. And so maybe a farmer might not be able to speak to you during their peak season, but if you know when they're at their busiest, then when they're not. And so you can go back during their slower times of the year where they might be able to dedicate a little more time to talking to you, so you can help grow that relationship a little bit more. Our goal when we're talking to farmers and business owners as well, ask if you can speak to their employees, ask how you might be able to speak to their employees, what is a good time to do so that is convenient for the farmer. So that might be when the workers are on break. It might be when their shift is over with, or even before they arrive. And so check to make sure, see when they do go on break, see what time the shift starts, see what time workers usually end and go back home, so you can know when is a good time to be able to speak to people that are working. Always ask how the business is going. Farmers respond really well when they know that you care not just about their workers, but about them and the business themselves. Also, check to see how other businesses in the area have been doing, what the farmer might know about those. A lot of times farmers know a lot of the other farms in the area and can give you good and valuable information. And lastly, you should always check and ask, if the farmer knows of anybody else in the area that you should talk to. A lot of times when we ask, who should we talk to, they can point us in the direction of another farm. They can point us in the direction of a resource that's important for us to know. And so always ask, who should I speak to next? As I mentioned, farmers and business owners are often very, very busy. And so we have to make sure that we are respecting their time and respecting their work. Don't always assume that they're going to have the time to be able to speak to you. whenever we do make that interaction, when we talk to them, make sure that you're always emphasizing that you're not there to obstruct any of the work that's being done, that you're not there to take away their time from their job. You want to make sure that you respect them and you respect their space as well. And so I think there's a lot that can go towards, when speaking to a farmer, one of the things I always recommend for recruiters, when we're talking about respecting their space, that includes the fields. Don't automatically just, go and walk out into the fields without asking for permission first. Don't drive up too close to the fields or drive up too close to the office, because those can kind of be seen as aggressive acts and can be seen as invading the farmer's space. So make sure that you are respecting their space and respecting their time. Ask permission before you go into a lot of those workspaces. Oftentimes, remember that farms have been in the farmers' families for many, many, many generations. And so it can be a very personal thing for them. And so make sure you're respecting their property, and it will make conducting the interview a lot easier. Farm business owners love talking about their work and may not often get a chance to be able to share it with outsiders. When you are initiating interviews or conversations with farmers or business owners, don't always just jump straight into asking them about, the people that work for them, asking them if they have people that are eligible. Start with that small talk by checking to see how the farm is going, asking questions that you may have about the agricultural process or about the work that they do. Try to find out as much information as you can so that you can learn, because the more you know, the more easier it will be to help you identify eligible students in the future and to know where to go to meet eligible students. And so try to find information that can help you ask questions as well to other farmers or business owners. Ask the farmer with what have they struggled with lately, or how has production been? How have things changed in recent years? I personally have found that when interacting with farmers and business owners, just knowing one little bit of information can help build a lot of trust. And so if you go to one farmer and you ask, what have you struggled with lately? And they tell you something, and I'll give you an example. Over the summer, I was recruiting in a state and I visited a dairy farm, and I asked the farmer, I said, hey, what have you been struggling with? And the farmer responded and said that lately they've been really struggling because they haven't been able to harvest as much hay for this year as they normally would like. So they're having a hard time feeding their cows. You can then take that little bit of information that you learned and you can go to another farm and use it to start and initiate conversation. And so the very next dairy farm I went to, when I went up to speak to the farmer who I'd never met before, we talked and I said, hey, I've heard that other farms in the area are struggling, with hay crops this year. They haven't been able to harvest as much, so they're struggling to feed their cows. Have you been having the same issue? And so when you ask them that in that way, you use that little bit of information that you learned from a previous farmer to ask questions. The farmer is going to think, okay, this person knows, a little bit about agriculture, knows about dairy, and they know what they're talking about. And that can really open that door to provide some trust, and that works as well with other things too. Something as simple as looking at the weather, just saying, okay, what has been the average rainfall over the past 2 weeks or past month, and knowing, okay, it's rainy. So now as you go out and talking to farmers, you can be like, hey, I know it's been raining a lot lately. How has that affected you and your work? So again, you're using that little bit of knowledge that you can gain that's really easy to get a hold of to open up conversation with farmers so that it looks like you know more than you probably do, because we got to fake it till we make it sometimes. And that builds up that trust and opens up the door, puts them at ease, and allows them to start talking to you about something that they feel comfortable with. Just as I was talking about research before going to the farm about issues that your local agriculture community has been dealing with. Use this information and information obtained from other farmers to ask questions that demonstrate that you care about their businesses. So we just talked about asking questions about rainfall, but if you notice there hasn't been a lot of rainfall this year, you can go to the farmer and you can say, hey, how has the drought been affecting you this year? Specifically, when I was talking about that dairy farm that hadn't been able to produce as much hay as before, it was because of lack of rainfall in the area. And so you can go and you can say, hey, I know the drought has been happening. How has that bothered you all? How has that affected the work? How has that affected your crops? How has that affected your animals? And, it'll open up conversations and allow the farmer to talk about something that they care about. If production, you find that other farms have been having a really, really good year, you can go to a farm and you can say, hey, I know a lot of farmers are having, one of the better years that they've had recently. How have you all been doing? And show excitement about what you're asking, because you're asking about something positive. And again, that opens up the door to allow the farmer to talk about something that they care deeply about and that they are very knowledgeable about. Remember as well that a lot of times farmers often care about their communities, but they may not be familiar with migrant education program or even Title I. And so whenever I go to speak with farmers, I always try to emphasize, how I am involved with the local schools and how the program helps students and families. While you're planning your questions, think about how the program in your area can benefit farmers too. You want to be able to go and approach farmers and have a practical way that the program can help them. And so, for example, you maybe take some resources that would be good for the farmer and their employees to know about, information about events that are happening in the community. One of the things that I've found to be really successful is being able to go to farmers and say, hey, we can offer English language resources that hopefully will help, your workers communicate with you a little bit better, if they have non-English speaking workers. And that can kind of open up doors, because that's something that the farmer wants as well. And so always enter into these conversations with the best intentions, believing the best in the person that you're speaking to, believing that they probably do care about their communities and the people that, are working for them, and then enter into those conversations on a positive note. So now if we're transitioning from speaking to the farmers to actually speaking to the people that are working for them, the goals of interviews with farm workers, to begin with, we always are trying to find out if they or their children are eligible for the migrant education program. So if, they are younger, trying to figure out if they could potentially be an out of school youth, or trying to see if they have children that could be eligible or qualify for the migrant education program. If they are out in the field and they are working, or if they are on break, or, getting ready to head to work, or even leaving work and don't have a lot of time, it's really, really important to try to find out their address or some kind of contact information so you can visit them at their home in order to have a longer conversation. Your goal when speaking to farm workers should always be to try to continue the conversation. And so that's whether continuing the conversation on site or getting the information that you need in order to have a conversation and a longer conversation at a later date and time. And so always try to get their address, always try to get a phone number so that you can contact them later. Check to see if there's others that are employed on the site that might also be eligible. Always try to ask how many other employees there are on the farm, how many other people are working, to try to see if there's other people that you can speak to that might be eligible or might have children that are eligible. Similarly, try to see if they have other friends or family in the area that might be eligible as well. A lot of times migrant workers, when they move into the area, they don't move alone. They move with friends, they move with others, they move with a crew. And so check to see, if they moved alone or if other people moved with them as well. Check to see maybe they moved in the area because they had other family there too. And so we always want to be trying to see who else we can talk to, who else, we can be directed to. And so always trying to find out if they know of anybody else. And then always ask them, if they know of any other places in the community that you should visit. And so these can be community locations, places that they often frequent, maybe other farms as well. Always ask them if they know other people you should talk to. Always helpful to ask, who should I talk to next? And hopefully they'll point you in the direction of somebody that can be helpful for you. Just as when you're talking to farmers or business owners, you want to always make sure that you are respecting the time of the workers that you are talking to. Remember that many of them there are working to make money. And so we don't want to be able to take away from the money that they can make. So always, ask workers when they go on break so you can speak to them then, or ask permission for you to speak to them. Don't assume that it's going to be okay for you to speak to them at a given point in time. You want to make sure that you're being respectful. Always ask, if you can arrange a time to visit them in their homes. Again, this is why we ask for their addresses or phone numbers so that we can meet them at a place and time that they're comfortable with so that you can meet the rest of the family, drop off any materials that you may have, and be able to have that longer conversation. Again, farm workers care deeply about their family and their children. So as you're talking to them, interacting, having these conversations, make sure you always begin by asking how they are doing, asking how their family doing, and how the work is going. Again, we want to make sure that we show that we care. I've seen a whole lot of recruiters make the mistake of going up and talking to somebody and immediately jumping into questions related to eligibility, or immediately jumping into long explanations about the migrant education program or services offered. And a lot of times, if we enter in and are too focused on the work side of things initially, such as eligibility or explaining the program, you can see when it's when farmers, kind of lose interest. And so a lot of that information can be overwhelming. And so begin by asking and showing that you care about them as people, asking how they're doing, how their family is going as well, and how the work is going. Try to find some common interest as well between you and them, you and the farm worker, to help initiate that conversation. It should be a place that they have it could be a place that they have previously lived, their home country, or something related to the work that they're doing. Me personally, if I'm going out and interacting with a lot of farm workers, one of the things that I have found to be very successful and to be helpful, is, trying to find that connection point, is to talk about soccer or sports. Even if you're not a soccer or sports fan, you can do just a little basic research in order to try to find out some information. I've gone to a lot of migrant camps before to speak to workers, to speak to OSY, and go and be like, oh, who's your favorite soccer team? And have that open up, a lot of other questions or a lot of other, conversations. And so, that's a quick and easy way to be able to try to interact and to find that common ground. Like I said, mentioning where people are from as well. People like talking about, their home. And so, if you have workers that are coming from international, different countries, ask them what their home is like. Ask them, what it's like back where they came from as well. And so these are other things that you can do to try to find that common ground. When you're talking to, now we're going to transition to talking to students and families. And so when we're talking to the students and families, our goals should always be, again, to try to find out if they're in fact eligible for the migrant education program, or if they know of anybody else in the area, such as family or friends, that could be eligible for the migrant education program. We want to check to see if they have any urgent needs that need to be met. And so trying to see if there's anything that they're going through, any maybe health issues that they're having to deal with that need to be met in the immediate time. The migrant education program is focused on education, and there's a lot of things that can happen, that can prevent a family from being able to focus on education, such as health issues. And so we want to make sure that these are things that are getting taken care of. Check to see if they know of any places in the area that are hiring for qualifying work. And so sometimes you may encounter in the community new people that have arrived, new people that have come into your area, maybe that they're looking for jobs. And so being able to know the places in your community that are hiring can be huge to helping, find people that qualify, because you can even point people that aren't interacting in qualifying work in direction of qualifying work so that they could potentially qualify. And again, always ask if there's anybody else in the community that you should speak to. Ask who's the next person you should go and see. And oftentimes families, people you talk to will point you in the direction of somebody. Just like when we're talking with workers, you want to always make sure that you begin any conversation by checking to see how the family or the student themselves is doing. Take the time to get to know them before beginning with any questions related to eligibility. And I can't stress that enough. I've seen so many times where workers or students, you lose interest in talking to the recruiters, because they just jump right into eligibility. Ask, during the introduction phase of the conversation and the interview, if they have any needs that are not being met, like we just talked about. And, you may need to list some examples of possible needs and services that can be referred to the person that you're speaking with so that they will properly understand the question. I think one of the issues that we lose sight of when talking to migrant families, especially when asking about the needs, is that we forget about the fact that a lot of times, our migrant families, they might not know and understand fully the services that were offered. And so when we're talking and asking about their needs, they're not aware of, what those needs could be or how we can interact with them to meet their needs. And so you might have to list some of the services that you all perform, some of the services that you offer, in order to kind of give some examples so that they know exactly what you're talking about and what kind of needs can be met. When asking families or students for information, always make sure to emphasize that any information shared with Migrant Education Program is private and will not be shared to outside parties. We have to remember our FERPA laws and how important they are to protect student information. Families, oftentimes are hesitant to share information with recruiters or on others who may qualify because they are worried the information could be shared with, the wrong people. And so you want to always explain to the family or the student that you're interacting with that when they share information, everything that they share is private. It will not leave, you as the recruiter or the migrant education program, and that they understand that by sharing that information, they can play an important part in helping you help others in the community. This is especially true when we are talking to families that might have been enrolled in the program for a long time, that have had success in the program, that have benefited from the program. When you're asking them specifically to help you locate any more students, bring it up and point to the fact how the program has helped your family so much. We would love for the program to be able to help others as well. Plan on sharing examples of the positive impact that the program has had on past students. Whenever possible, share any photos you might have from summer camp or MEP events. And so maybe from PAC meetings that might have taken place. Maybe you all have field days in your community. These are just some examples of the kind of MEP events where you might take pictures that'd be really good to share with families. Success stories and photos can always help a family or student visualize themselves in a similar position and can help build trust. As well, ask, if you're talking to a student, ask the student about their dreams or goals are for the future so that you can demonstrate how exactly the MEP can help them achieve those goals or help them achieve their dreams. One thing I will share quickly here, again, since FERPA is so important, before sharing any stories or photos with families, make sure you have written permission from the person in that story or from the people in that photo in order to share it with others so that we're not, breaking any of those privacy laws. So now we're going to move on and talking to school staff. Recruiting with school staff is also very, very important. We as recruiters should know who the Title I director is in the regions that we're working with, in the school districts that we're working with. We should know who the superintendents are, who the principals are. And so, we're going to have to interact a lot of times, with these school staff. And so our goals when interacting with school staff should, number one, check to see if there are any student eligible for MEP, in their school, especially if you have the title, if you're talking with the Title I director for the school district, they're going to be able to give you the information about the schools that see the most mobility. So those are the schools that would see the most people coming and going. And so knowing that kind of information can point you in the direction of a school or area in the city that you're working in where students might live. Check to see if the school staff knows of any other leads or information that could be helpful or lead to potential eligible students. Sometimes they'll hear things from students in their class. Sometimes, they'll hear things from other teachers as well. Ask the teachers or school staff if they know of any resources in the community that you can refer MEP students to. And then check to see if there's any needs of the students that are not currently being met. A lot of times the superintendent or Title I director can tell you about the needs students have in their school district and in their community. And so you want to check to see if there are any needs that the students may have that the program currently isn't meeting, the school isn't meeting, so that you can work to get the students and the families the resources that they need. One of the things that I will say is don't always assume that just because they work at a school or maybe are a teacher that they're going to know what the migrant education program is. I've heard from a lot of recruiters around the country stories of going to schools, interacting, trying to talk to teachers, and teachers not knowing what MEP are. And so, always be prepared to explain what the migrant education program is. Try to give a brief history of, the Title I Part C, which is the formal name for the migrant education program, so that people can understand, where the program comes from and exactly what it does. Just as when you're talking to families, always have some success stories that you can share to demonstrate how the program has had a positive impact. This is especially helpful, when you're talking to those superintendents and you're trying to get into schools, you're talking to the principals, having those success stories can help them see how you're going to directly affect their students. Teachers and school staff, remember, can also be good links to valuable resources in your community. Many times people that work for the schools, so this Title I director, they're going to know about the resources that are available in their communities. And so ask them about what resources are out there that you should know about so that you can get those resources connected to your families. Make sure you're checking with the person that you're speaking with to see what they know about resources in the communities. Ask what they know about English language classes. Ask them what they know about food banks, clothing drives, churches that might cater towards migrant students as well. Any childcare programs in the area. I know childcare is a huge issue with many migrant families. And again, remember that a little planning can often go a long, long way. Recognize that when we're out there, no two interviews are ever going to be alike. All interviews that you conduct as a recruiter are going to be different, whether that be, you're talking to a farmer, you're talking to a family, even if you're talking to two people that have the same job. You could be talking to two people that work at the exact same farm, and the interviews aren't going to be. So try to think ahead of how an interview may go and how to respond. Try to think about what could go wrong. Talk to them. How can they respond? Try to possible situations you may have. So now we're going to conduct a little activity. For everybody, brainstorm how you would handle encountering difficult situations in the field. So to the following questions. Let us know in chat to begin with, how would you respond or what would you tell a person that is uncomfortable giving you their information? Oh, I'm sorry. I think it sounds like there might have been an audio issue. I apologize for that. Can you all hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you all so much. I apologize for that. And so we're going to do a quick activity where I would love to hear you all, suggestions from you all. I find one of the best ways that recruiters can learn is by hearing from other recruiters. And so we're going to take the time, and I would love to hear from you all how you would handle different situations in the field. So the first situation in the field, how would you respond to somebody that is uncomfortable giving you their information? We already had one response in chat, saying, just assuring them, letting them know that you're not going to share their personal information. What are some other things that you might be able to tell them or do?
I can share a little bit of what I do, and it has been very successful, if that's okay.
Yeah, I would love to hear from you. Can you please give me your name and where you're from?
My name is Norma Kinney, and oops, it's upside down. I don't know why. My name is Norma Kinney, and I am with the Region 6 in Huntsville, Texas, and I am a migrant recruiter. And the initial contact to me is very important because it sets the tone. If I contact a family, by phone, the first thing that my conversation is where I start. I start a conversation more as I am meeting a new friend. And that's what I say to them when I call them. I said, I'm here to serve you, and I am here to help you to make sure that your child is successful. And I always set the expectations. If they are qualified for the program, they may or may not. However, I still have some information, some resources that will be available to them. So I always try to just talk to them. I ask them about the children, how are they doing? I just conversate as they're talking and giving me information, I'm writing down some things. And I'm always asking them about, tell me about your family. I just want to get to know. And when I get into the interview process, I give them the option if they want to meet in person, or the interview can be conducted by phone. And if they have time, I go into the next piece and I say, I would like to get to know you and your family a little better, more. I would like to get to know you more so that we can see if you qualify for this program. Let's see what we can do for you.
Go ahead.
This is me, Aida, from
Hey,
Nebraska.
Aida.
Hi. Well, when I just met a family like yesterday, one of the family referred me another family. That was the first time that I see the family. And I just, like what the lady said, I just start talking about how's your family's doing. Do you have a food right now? So, and we start building trust. It sometimes take rural areas take more time. So by the end, they will say, hey, I have another family that live 30 minutes from here. So it takes time. It's just the build trust to say everything that we taught you and I is gonna stay with me, that I'm here to help you. I want to make sure that kids got the services from the migrant program. So in that family last night referred me 3 more COEs in just one, I would say in 4 hours.
Wow.
And last, they gave me another one from Idaho, and I think now you received the referral, Justin.
Yeah.
So it's just being in the small time, I got 3 COEs and another family from out of state. It's just the trust. It's building trust.
Yeah. And so I think that's a great point. You know, we have a lot of responses in chat saying, you know, make sure you stress that you're not going to share the information with anybody, letting them know that it's beneficial for you. But I think, you know, one of the things we have to also realize is that, you know, we have to have patience. We really, really have to have patience and build that trust, just like Aida was saying. I know for me, one time I met a family who I would go once a week to speak to this family. And I would always ask them if they knew of anybody else that might qualify, or to try to give me some information. And they wouldn't. It took 4 months of me going once a week before they finally gave in and pointed me in the direction of another family that qualified. And so it takes time to build up that trust, you know, before, you know, some of these doors will open. Leo in chat also said, you know, with many of our, you know, Hispanic or Spanish speaking families, usually show them the school badge, you know, and speak to them in Spanish and tell them that they'll do everything in the power to ensure that the family will receive their benefits. I think those are all terrific ideas. Similarly, talking about, you know, the school and school badges, what would you do in a situation, you know, where the family asks you why the school did not let them know that you would be coming?
Well, can I talk?
Of course, yeah, the floor is yours.
Okay. I haven't seen that situation in my rural areas, and when I'm with the family, I make sure to call the school and say, hey, I'm here with these families. Can I talk with the secretary or bilingual staff? And then, since they trust the school so much, And you know, as the Latino, they trust the school. They think there's the teachers are the best, are the better. I mean, the best person to trust. So, like yesterday, what I say, I called the school and I asked for the bilingual staff. So the bilingual staff talked with the mom, oh, Aida, and she explained what we do with the migrant program and say, oh, okay, so I can give my information. It's just the trust. And spend time with them, make sure, don't promise anything that we're not gonna be able to do.
100%, 100%. We are.
I would
We
like
all-
to share.
Yeah, go for it.
Again, this is Norma Kinney with Region 6, and I really haven't encountered that question. And probably because in the beginning, I always, again, introduce myself. This is Miss Norma Kinney. I'm with Region 6, and we service the districts, several districts in your area, and blank ISD, which is the one your child attends to, is who we, and we would like to be a service to you. And that always opens up a very good door. And I never really received that question. Not that I won't have it asked, but so far I have not been asked that question because I pretty much give them the details in the beginning of the conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, I think these are all very good responses, and all very, very helpful as well. And so how would you all respond to a situation where somebody asks you where, your funding comes from?
Can I answer?
Yeah.
When I had not been happened to me, but when I said I work from the Department of Education, so that's why they start, oh, it's a person to trust. I'm from the Department of Education migrant program, and then we start talking. I never have the situation they're asking where the money come from, because we explain so good the program.
I think explaining, what the program is and explaining it's a federal program,
Yeah.
Goes a long way to helping the people reassure. I have had, all of these questions before from out in the field. Sometimes people ask questions quite aggressively. Sometimes they're actually curious. And so, it's important things, to think about. It's important things I think to have, an answer for ahead of time, just as we're talking about planning.
Yeah, like yesterday, one of the families said, I'm a USA citizen. That's okay if you're a USA citizen, but we are not, in Nebraska, we are not allowed to ask that question. The program is for everybody that qualify. So we have a Vietnamese, Sudanese, Mexican, we have from all the world. So we cannot ask that question.
Yeah, and I think that's a terrific point, because you will encounter people sometimes, farm owners or business owners or other people in the community, ask, or even families themselves ask if students have to be citizens. And it's a good point to always make sure, that you say, that the program is always for anybody that meets the eligibility requirements. That, it's not, it's not our responsibility. Like Ida was mentioned, we are not allowed to ask, for documentation status a lot of times. And so always keep things, always keep things positive when having these conversations. Always try to smile and just let them know that you're there to help anybody you can. All right, to continue on, a big part is making sure that you are approaching your interview subject at a time that is convenient for them. Attempting to have a conversation or interview at the wrong date or time can oftentimes leave a bad impression that might need you to overcome. Oftentimes it's our first impression that lasts the longest. And so we want to make sure that we have, leave a good impression. So when you're planning to conduct interviews, you're planning to go out there into the community, make sure you're taking the time to choose a day and time to approach your subject that will not inconvenience them. Just kind of like we talked earlier about how farmers, might be really busy during the busy season. So to come during the off season as well. We want to make sure, that we're not going and visiting families in their homes, when it's too late at night or too early in the morning. So we want to make sure we're choosing times and dates that are going to be make people feel comfortable in speaking with us. Recruiters should always try to build rapport to make the person they're speaking with feel more comfortable and to maintain a tone of happiness and friendliness so that they can minimize any character or any barriers to open communication. Just as we were talking about earlier, always try to smile, try to be positive as best as you can. I know sometimes for many of us, it might take a lot of energy to be positive all the time and to be smile, but it really does, have a big, good impact on the interviews. And so be open to the conversations. Also be aware that sometimes, people might just need somebody to talk to. And so there's many times as well that I've gone to speak to a family and then they've just had to kind of vent for a little bit. So you just stand there, you smile and you let them talk. And a lot of times, that can go a long way to building that trust as well.
Justin, can I say something?
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes we have problems on life. So make sure to, when we go to the family, leave the problems in the home, because we are here to listen to the families. If you go to the family and you are worried, I know it's hard because I was single mom for a long time. So it's so hard to go to with so many problems and we have in life. Make sure to have a smile, make that difference for the families.
It really, really, really does make a big difference. I think one of the things that I realized over the years as I was recruiting is we have to realize, a lot of the families that we talk to, a lot of the communities we go to can be quite isolating. It can be difficult when you're somebody that might not know the language that's spoken, that might not know their way around town. Imagine a family that's coming to your city for the very first time. They might not be an English-speaking family. They might not know where to go to the store. And so a lot of times when you show up, you might be one of the few people outside of their work or immediate family that they're going to be speaking to and they're interacting that week. And so having that positive conversation, showing up, smiling, being open to listening to them goes a really, really long way with building that trust. And also,
Justin, when you spend quality time with the families, that family is gonna that's the one that's gonna keep in your mind that Aida spend time to me listening, and that family later on is, if she moved from another state or come back, she's gonna call you again.
Yes,
because you are the one that spend quality time with the families.
Yeah, I oftentimes when I'm training new recruiters, I talk to them about the idea of quality over quantity. A lot of times making sure that we have a good connection with one family can go a long way and a lot longer way to helping us find new students than it does if we meet and speak to 10 different families. And so taking that time, especially if you find a family that's willing to talk to you, that wants to have those conversations, to be able to sit down, talk to them, to spend that time to build that trust. Similarly, in order to establish rapport with the interview subject, with the person that you're speaking to, recruiters must make a genuine effort, to put the person at ease. Recruiters should always avoid cliche phrases like "now don't be nervous" or "just relax," as they are often cliches that often, do work the opposite of what is intended. Sometimes we don't even realize that we say things that might actually make people more nervous. So just be aware of what you're saying and try to put a genuine effort into putting people at ease. Be aware of cultural issues as well. If you have different cultures that you might not be familiar with, we're seeing a lot of more students coming in from Southeast Asia, a lot more students coming in from the Middle East, a lot more students coming in from African countries as well, that these are cultures that we might not be as familiar with. Make sure that you take the time to read up on the cultures, read up on, the do's and don'ts in their culture so that you can be aware, so that when you're interacting with families, you're not doing anything that might make them feel uncomfortable or might offend them. Recruiters should always give the interview subjects the time during the beginning of the interview to adjust to their situation and process what is happening and what you are saying. Remember that the person you encounter may never have experienced a stranger knocking on their door before. This is, I think, really true for a lot of families and something that we as recruiters don't ever think about. They might not have ever had somebody show up and just want to talk to them before. And so it's important to give them the time and the space to be able to process what is happening and to adjust as needed. I think part of this adjustment process, again, is making sure that you're not just jumping too much into eligibility and eligibility related issues. Take the time to have that quality introduction, to really talk to the family and to get to know them first before jumping into a lot of the heavier things related with work. Be aware of what can cause and provoke anxiety person you're speaking with. Avoid any behaviors as well that might provoke anxiety or nerves. Some things that we might not even realize. Oh, sorry, I think my audio was having a little bit of issues. Some things that we might not even realize can cause anxiety. When we're talking to families, if we're taking extended notes right in front of them, I oftentimes, tell, for newer recruiters, it can be good to be taking notes while having conversations, but just be aware, if you will be taking notes, just let the family know ahead of time that you're going to be doing so that they feel comfortable and know exactly what it is that you're doing. Don't stand too close to the subject. Sometimes, there are people that can be close talkers where they want to get really, really up close to you. But for a lot of the cultures that we interact with, that our families are from, personal space is really important. So you want to avoid, getting too close to the person that you're talking to. Avoid overwhelming the subject with too much information. I know that we talked about this a little before, and it's something that I've seen a lot of recruiters do. When they immediately start talking about the migrant education program, and they'll spend a full 2 minutes just telling everything all at once. The person that you're speaking to, doesn't have time to process it. And you can kind of see the lights go out as they lose interest or get confused. Avoid asking any really invasive questions or personal questions way too early, and avoid sarcasm or humor unless you are positive that the subject is going to understand it. A lot of times, especially when we're talking about cross cultures, things that we might find funny, other people might not find funny. And so it can make people feel uncomfortable if they're not aware that there's a joke. And so try to avoid those things unless you know for a fact the person would understand. Interviews don't need a script. So we don't need a script to follow while out in the field, but sometimes we do need someone to guide them. And so you can never know exactly how an interview is going to go, but you as the recruiter has the ability to guide the interview as best as you can with your questions and by using positive body language. And again, I stress and emphasize positive because we want to stay positive because that's going to help put the people that we're talking to, make them feel more comfortable. Remember that the interview subject or the person you're speaking with might be overly sensitive to all reactions because of their anxiety. Remember again what I just mentioned. A lot of times the families we're talking to, you might be the first person that's ever come and knocked on their door. And so they are already anxious. And I know for us as well, thinking about all the times that somebody has come and knocked on your door, a lot of us automatically go into it thinking that it's going to be something negative. And so people that we're talking to might have anxiety. And so we want to make sure to be aware of that and to pay attention to it. Take advantage of that and use their sensitivity and awareness to maintain the conversation in positive channels. Even small inflections in your voice and small actions can give encouragement. You want to make sure that you repeat phrases used by the subject of the interview to demonstrate that you are listening. A really good, active listening technique is just to repeat, the words that you're hearing back, because that lets the person know that you did in fact hear them. Studies show that repeating elements of the subject's answers encourages them to continue talking and to provide further details. Sometimes merely restating the reply allows the time for reflection or clarification of a point possibly lost in the first answer. And so when you repeat an answer that somebody has given you back to them, it gives that person the time that they need to think through it to see if there's anything they need to clarify or any other information that needs to be added. You want to make sure that you provide continued support to the subject of the interview by providing nonverbal feedback. Again, this goes back to active listening and letting them know that they are being heard. Studies show that nodding your head up and down is one of the most effective form of nonverbal feedback and is viewed as a sign of affirmation by many diverse cultures around the world. So when you nod your head up and down when you're listening to somebody, that's an almost universal sign that, yes, I am listening and I hear what you're saying. Be careful, though, of verbal affirmations or feedbacks. A lot of times, even subconsciously we say, huh, or while listening to somebody. And, these things can oftentimes be misinterpreted by interview subjects. Unfortunately, due to anxiety or nerves, people that when they're talking to you can be quick to jump to negative conclusions. And so if you say, huh, while somebody says something, I might take that as you disagreeing with them. That might take you that as a negative. And so we want to avoid anything that could possibly be misinterpreted. In a very similar vein, Leo in chat has provided some really great advice that I often, share with new recruiters as well. Leo says that they were told by their coordinator to avoid using the words like migrant worker and even sometimes migrant education program, and instead use agricultural worker and education program for agricultural workers. Earlier in chat, somebody mentioned that they've seen how the word migrant is often confused with immigrant. And so as we're trying to make people feel comfortable, we should avoid using terms that people might not know or might be uncomfortable with. And so we want to make sure that any words that we use, that people know the definition that we are trying to put forth. And so if there's a word that you think might be problematic or might be confusing, then try to avoid it as best as you can. As you're having the conversation, occasionally provide a brief summary of the information that you have obtained and understood. This is especially true when you're talking about eligibility and are obtaining information for the COE. You can stop the person, you can say, okay, so, your name is this, you move from here to here on this date, as a way to kind of like summarize everything that you've learned. Doing so can help make sure that the information you collect is correct, which is especially crucial when we're talking about information for the COEs, and it helps provide clarity for the subject, for the person that you're speaking to, about what has occurred during the interview. At the end of the interview, a precise statement of what was learned, general conclusions reached, and what the next step should be can help reduce any confusion that your interview subject may have. Remember that oftentimes when we're trying to gain information, the questions that you ask are going to help guide the conversation, and you should try to ask questions that'll guide the conversation in a productive and positive way. Avoid any leading questions that might force the interview subject, force the person that you're speaking to answer in a certain way, or have any built-in questions or built-in answers to them. This is especially true when we're talking about eligibility. For example, if you're trying to find out if a family worked in a certain type of industry, don't ask them directly, hey, did you pick tomatoes? Or hey, did you, feed chickens? Because that can be a leading question because you're providing them with information. And so, always make sure that you ask questions in an open way, Instead of asking, hey, did you pick tomatoes? Just ask, hey, did you engage in any work while you were here? Did you have a job while you were there? Those kind of things, in order to make sure that you're not leading your subject. You want to always reflect and review the questions that you're going to be asking and your interview techniques. When you know what information you want to obtain, you can write down ahead of time the questions that you want to ask that are going to help lead to the goals that you have set for yourself. Try to think creatively about how you can ask your questions. One of the things that new recruiters have to learn a lot of times is that many times you end up asking the same question multiple times. And so because you ask the same question multiple times, it can be really helpful, again, to think creatively about how you can ask questions so that you have it prepared to ask in any way that you can. Like, as we've talked about before, don't immediately begin your conversation by asking difficult questions concerning eligibility. A study of effective interviewers found that many times you begin interviews by asking the most general and broadest questions possible. So again, questions related to the person you're talking to's well-being, their feelings are great questions to start with, to build rapport with, because they're open-ended and broad. And so you want to start with those open-ended and broader questions, especially introductory questions, before moving into open-ended questions related more specifically with the goals that you have outlined for the interview. And then lastly, you can conclude it by asking very, very specific questions about specific information, or asking them yes or no questions. One of the things that I often kind of tell recruiters that I'm training that are new is, you want to try to avoid, for as long as possible during an interview, any questions that has just a straight no as an answer, because a lot of times those no's can kind of be, can kind of shut the door on further conversation. And so work to try to stay as long as possible saying yes to keep that conversation going and flowing. Don't overwhelm the interviewee, the person you're talking to, by asking too many questions at once. Recruiters oftentimes try to rush their conversation, especially eligibility interviews, and they can ask too many questions at once. And that can be really overwhelming for people. They think that they have to reach a certain quota of how many people they have to speak to during the day, certain number of COEs. And so they want to rush and get through so they can go on and speak to the next person. Take your time, let the conversation be there, let it develop naturally. Don't rush anything. Don't ask too much. Be flexible in the questions that you are asking, and let the conversation flow naturally. Don't be afraid to go in a different direction and change the topic of the conversation if the interview is not going as you wish. You always have that option to take a step back. You can always return to the topic that might have been making the person uncomfortable at a later point as well. Don't feel like you're forced to stick to a certain line of questioning. And so if you notice body language or even verbal confirmation that the person might not be as comfortable with what you're asking, or might have a negative response, change the subject, talk about something different, try to build up more rapport, and then see if maybe they can come back to the conversation at a later point. Once you begin obtaining information, you can then transition into those more specific questions like we mentioned. Questions with yes or no answers should be avoided until the end of the interview, just like we talked about, oftentimes because they can be conversation enders. And so because of that, we should avoid them, try to keep the conversation going, trying to get as many yeses as we can. Remember that recruiters are often going to need to ask the same question multiple times. This is why when I was talking about, creativity, it can be so important. You will have to ask the same question multiple times and in a variety of different ways. When you are planning for your conversations, think ahead of time of different ways you can always ask the same questions. For example, if you're trying to ask somebody, where they worked or how work was performed, think 2 to 3 different ways you can ask that. This is especially true when asking about moving. I have found that during eligibility interviews, recruiters oftentimes ask, when was the last time you moved? And so that question can be problematic because the word move can have a lot of different definitions from person to person. And so for us, maybe a family going 2 months to a new city to work in the fields and then coming back would be considered a move, but for that family, they might not consider that a move. And so you have to think, what are the different ways I can ask if this person has been anywhere else besides where they are? And so I've oftentimes, I might ask them, when was the last time they moved? I'll ask them, hey, how long have you been living here? Ask them, hey, did you ever go to anywhere else, maybe for a short period of time and come back? Have you visited anywhere else? Those are all the kind of ways that you can kind of frame the question differently, so you can ask it multiple times to try to see if you can get any further information.
Justin, I have
Yes.
something to say.
Yes.
Sometimes when I go and visit the mom and I ask those questions, I see pictures, nice pictures. I say, oh, where did you took that picture? This really nice picture. Oh, it's because we went to California. Oh, what did you do there? Oh, we were working on the fields. Oh, I thought that you said you didn't move. Oh, it's because I forgot. If you don't see that picture, I never thought about it. That's a small picture of the families may say a lot.
Yeah, and I think that shows the importance of why sometimes asking the same question multiple ways can be very helpful, because a lot of times our families might not remember all the moves they make. They can move around so much, they might not consider it a move. And so, you can ask them, hey, have you been anywhere else? What other states do you know? What other places do you know? Ask them those kind of questions to see if there's anywhere else that they have previously been, so that, you can then find out when they were there to see if maybe there was a move. At least once a year, always try to have another recruiter, or even better, your supervisor, follow you when you're out recruiting, go out with you into the field to be able to observe you and your interviewing technique. I mentioned earlier, I think truly one of the best ways that we as recruiters can learn and grow is learning from one another. And so having somebody shadow you to watch you, and also seeing how they conduct their interviews, can be a great way of learning and can give you great insight into the things that you might have missed during the conversation, or thinking of different ways of phrasing your questions. And so working with the partners can be really, really helpful, because you can see them ask questions in a certain way and go, wow, that really worked for them. I want to ask it that way too. Oftentimes when we're conducting interviews, we can be really, really afraid of silence, afraid of anybody not speaking. However, when faced with silence, recruiters are often too quick to ask questions, or too quick to just get into the next subject, instead of letting the interviewee, the person that you're talking to, process their thoughts. Silence during an interview gives the interview subject, the person that you're speaking with, the opportunity to reflect and process internally the questions that are being asked, and to formulate their own thoughts. Don't be afraid of silence. Recruiters oftentimes want to continue asking questions, continue pushing their interview subject to avoid those silences that they may perceive as awkward, when in reality, the person that you're speaking with is just processing information, just thinking. And so we got to give them that time and space to think. Recruiters shouldn't be afraid of silence. Like I said, it can give the interview subjects time to think properly about their work, about their move history. We just heard Aida speak about, a situation where the family forgot they had gone to California. Oftentimes, if we let them think about the questions, let them process it, they can remember those things. And so we have to give them that time to think about their work and move history, just in case they need it to be able to explain it properly. If a recruiter permits another few extra seconds of silence during conversations, they oftentimes can obtain even more vital bits of information that otherwise would have lost or remained in half-expressed state in the interviewee's thought process. And so having that silence allows the person that you're speaking to fully process, to fully think through what they were thinking, so that they can express it better to you. An important tip that I've found is that a study of interviewers found that the people who conduct the interview often overestimate the length of silent pauses in the interview. And so interviewers believe that the silent pauses during the interview were 10 to 100 times longer than what they actually are. And so if you feel like there's an uncomfortable silence, or if you feel that something is taking too long, remember that it is only your perception, and that you as a person conducting the interview are probably perceiving it as being a lot longer than what it actually is. Interview subjects oftentimes believe that silent pauses are actually much shorter than what they actually are. And so it's okay to let those conversations breathe, let the silent pauses happen, and let everything flow naturally. All right, well, everybody, we have been here for an hour and 15 minutes, and I really, really appreciate the time. So we're gonna wrap up our panel for today, our session. One of the things that we do ask for everybody that attends any of IDRC's training sessions is to complete one of our training review forms. And so I'm going to post the link in chat to the SurveyMonkey link to the training review form so that you can fill it out and complete it. You also, if you've never done so before, there's a QR code on the screen. You can scan the QR code using your phone, which will open up the link directly to the SurveyMonkey. We want to be able to make sure that we at IDRC are always providing the best training possible to everybody, as well as giving people the opportunity to let us know what trainings they want to see in the future. So fill out the form as well. And let us know what you thought and what you would like to learn about in the future. I really appreciate everybody here taking the time to attend the New Recruiter Bootcamp. I hope it's been really helpful for you. This presentation webinar will be up shortly on the Whova platform, as well as we're going to be uploading it to the IDRC website and to the IDRC YouTube channel. And so be on the lookout for that. And so if you all have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is on the screen, and I'll post it in the chat as well. But I thank you all again for being here, and I hope you all have a great rest of the boot camp.